The hills surrounding your valley are your barricade to protect you during your vulnerable state. Whatever you speak out to the hills is what you will receive in the form of an echo. Hey there, mom friend. Welcome to the MommAdulting podcast with your fellow mom friend, Kelly Michele. Here, we build a judgment-free community of millennial moms who are just trying to figure out all the things that come with raising tiny human beings, while also trying to figure out our own lives. In each episode, I share tips, stories, and a whole bunch of unsolicited advice on how to navigate some of the challenges we face as moms, such as defining our career paths, nurturing our extra-maternal relationships, meaning relationships that don't involve our children, making time for self-care, identifying what we need in our current seasons, and the list goes on. Now, mom friend, I don't have it all figured out, but I know that together we can start making progress. I like to take a moment before each episode to breathe and relax so we can jump in with clear minds and expectant souls. Now, let's take a deep breath in and out. Let's take our masks off. Let's turn our vulnerability on. Let's let our guards down. Let's raise our hearts up. Ready? Great. Let's jump in. It's good to have you here today, mom friend. Just to let you know, I have been suffering from these Tennessee allergies. I'm a bit stuffy and congested, so thank you in advance for bearing with me. Okay. So these last few days, I have been reflecting on my last few years. I don't know how you all grew up, but I grew up in a Baptist church, and we used to sing this song. As I look back over my life, do you know it? I can see how the Lord was guiding me. Well, anyway, it is so easy now to see how God has been in the midst of everything. All the joys, all the sorrows. Sure, it's easy to kind of acknowledge his presence in those times when I felt like I was on a mountaintop. But mom friend, as I was going through, that's a whole other story. But it really shocks me how some of those low moments in my life are still so prominent in my memory. I remember praying for certain job opportunities. And then when I got in those companies, I was like, Lord, please get me out. I'll do whatever you want. Just get me out of here. I remember telling the Lord that I wanted to travel and live in different parts of the country and world. Now that I've lived in 3 cities in the last 2.5 years, I find myself missing the old smelly apartment I used to live in before I got married. I prayed for marriage. And though I absolutely love my marriage, I sometimes struggle living out that whole and the two shall become one thing. I remember praying for the Lord to heal me so I could carry children. And, well, things didn't go the way I thought they would. My life is full of so many hilltops and yet so many valleys. So you know what I'm about to say, right, mom friend? Yup, valleys. Let's talk about it. When I was 19, I was diagnosed with a cardiac arrhythmia condition called ventricular tachycardia. So I have multiple nerves that misfire and send way more electrical signals to my heart than necessary. This causes it to beat very fast and oftentimes way off rhythm. So during the initial few weeks of my diagnosis, my electrophysiologist at the time told me that I would not be able to safely carry or birth children because the medication I had to take daily would cause birth defects. And also, he believed that my heart would not be able to sustain the stress that is brought on by changes in blood flow and other things that happen with pregnancy. So at 19, almost 20, that was extremely hard for me to hear. And it became a burden I carried for a decade. So before my husband and I got married, I did share the extent of my diagnosis and the potential repercussion of pregnancy, like what could happen if ever I did get pregnant. And we believed the Lord for healing, but also accepted that babies might not ever come from my womb. Well, mom friend, listen. Not even 4 months into our marriage, I felt a shift in my body. You all know what I'm talking about. But mainly, like, my meds just weren't working the way that they were supposed to. And I felt miserable. So I took a home pregnancy test and it was positive. I bawled. And I have to be honest, mom friends, these were not tears of joy. They were tears of sadness, tears of anger, tears of fear. Why would God, in all his sovereignty and his omniscience, allow this to happen to me? Why do I now have to risk my life and or the baby's life? He has the power to heal. Why didn't he heal me? So I immediately called my new electrophysiologist, and he promised me that he was going to take care of me and make sure that both me and the baby were safe. This guy had an incredible amount of faith and confidence to be able to make such a huge promise. And truth be told, mom friend, I had to borrow his faith. Pregnancy was not easy at all. But I believed that if God was going to allow this to happen, he was going to heal me so that I could have the birth I desired. Natural, vaginal, no pain meds, untethered by all the monitors and machines and all the things. I had actually stopped taking my heart meds because I did not want my baby to have any birth defects. Solely by the grace of God and his infinite mercy, I only experienced like some mild adverse effects compared to what could have been death. So, mom friend, the Lord did not heal me before my labor was induced. And I was tied down to what felt like every machine they could find in the hospital. But I still held on to my desire for a vaginal birth with no pain meds. And miraculously, throughout the labor process, my heart rate remained normal. I mean, despite me not even taking my heart meds. After about 33 hours, the labor pains were overwhelming. I begged for the nurse to come and numb me so I could at least think straight for just a moment. Anyway, to cut to the chase, I started pushing at the 36th hour, but when I went into VTech, my OB told me I had to stop pushing. It took an hour for them to stabilize my heart rate. And throughout the whole ordeal, the on-call cardiologist was absolutely amazed that I was fully conscious and coherent. So once my heart went back into normal rhythm, they prepped me for a C-section. After the surgery, they took me to ICU, and I was there for 2.5 days. Mom friend, while I was in that room, I felt myself going deeper and deeper into the valley. I had just endured a long and uncomfortable pregnancy. I had just endured a seemingly endless labor. I ended up having to be sliced wide open. And I had to sneak to see my baby for the first 2.5 days because the doctor would not release me to my postpartum room, even though I was fully stabilized. Why was I there? Why was I in this valley? My spiritual parents, they did come to visit me in the ICU. They wanted to remind me of who I am in Christ. And honestly, I don't remember all that they said. It really just went in one ear and out the other. I was in the valley, and all I could hear was the echo of my disappointments bouncing off the hills. Mom friend, may I give you some unsolicited advice for when you find yourself in a valley? The hills surrounding your valley are your barricade to protect you during your vulnerable state. Whatever you speak out to the hills is what you will receive in the form of an echo. It's okay and even necessary to acknowledge the hurt, the pain, the disappointment, the anger. But then you are responsible for your journey of healing. Healing does not happen instantaneously for most of us. It takes time. It's a journey. It takes intentionality, and it takes honesty. Some valleys we find ourselves in are completely out of our control. There's nothing we can do about it. But many are results of our own decisions. Here's some more unsolicited advice. Examine the valleys in your life. I encourage you, mom friend, to be honest with yourself about what part you might have had in getting there. After I had covenant, I had to make the decision to take charge of my own emotional and spiritual healing. It took me nearly 9 months postpartum to make the first initial step. And I had to acknowledge that much of my birth experience was self-inflicted because I was not adaptable. I said it. I was so insistent and rigid about how things should be that I left no room for plans B, C, and D. I remember when I was working for an organization some years ago, one of my supervisors told me during a one-on-one that I was too rigid and that rigidity would prevent me from moving forward in my career. Now, mom friend, listen. I was beyond offended, and I harbored a lot of resentment against her for years. I thought I had forgiven her, but every time I thought about it, I was mad all over again. I mean, the flames were roaring. As I started preparing for this episode, I realized that my inflexibility in certain situations was the source of many emotional valleys. I can be as rigid as a mountain. You hear me, mom friend? But wisdom is now teaching me to understand when I need to be steadfast and when I need to be open to changing course. So, a little tip: if you want to know when to be adaptable and when to be steadfast, ask yourself these 3 questions. 1, is my steadfastness based on value or pride? Remember that pride comes before the fall. If you're holding on to a value, then that's a different story. And I highly recommend that you go back to my first episode called Boundaries and listen to the stories that I shared on how I have established boundaries based on my values. There's plenty of unsolicited advice and tips as well. Number 2, am I so adaptable that I have no structure and don't know what to stand for? So this typically manifests itself in the form of people pleasing. There are some things I can be unnecessarily headstrong about, and others that I should be more headstrong about. But because I don't want to ruffle feathers, I've not established the necessary values to help define how I operate, which ultimately leads me to disappointment and more valleys. And number 3, does my stance benefit me in the long run? I know personally I can be short-sighted and not look at the big picture sometimes, especially when my emotions are involved. But when I specifically think back on my birth story with Covenant, if I was more flexible in my birth plan, I would not have had so much disappointment. I would have been able to fully celebrate the miracle of having a baby instead of dwelling on the condition of my body. So here's some more unsolicited advice. Surround yourself with trusted community who will tell you the truth in love. I know how hard it can be to have hope when you find yourself in these moments. But when you have that community of people in place, those people who are full of hope, you will be able to borrow their hope until you can muster up enough of your own. As I wrap up, I want to leave you with this word of scripture. Lamentations chapter 3, verses 17 through 18, and verses 21 through 23 in the ESV read, "My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is. So I say, my endurance has perished. So has my hope from the Lord. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." Mom friend, when you have no peace and your happiness is gone, I encourage you to bring back to mind that God does love you. Your circumstance does not change his character, and your situation is not permanent. Allow hope to lead you to the stream of water to refresh your soul. The hills surrounding your valley are your barricade, and so do I. Protect you during your vulnerable state. Whatever you speak out to the hills. So that's all I have for you today, mom friend. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I hope something I shared blessed you. To help me continue building this community, please take a moment or two to leave a comment letting me know what your greatest takeaway is. What has your most recent valley looked like? And did you notice any streams of water? Make sure you subscribe to, follow, like, and share this podcast if you haven't already. You don't want to miss a single episode. I hope you tune in next week. Remember to grow a bit today so you can love tomorrow a little more. Until next time, make sure your shirt is not inside out and your skirt's not twisted. You got this, mom friend.